Hey, hey, hey! Welcome everybody to our live. We are on a Tuesday, sometimes we are, and a huge welcome to Rob Stewart here, who I'm very, very excited to have here with us today. So, Rob, for anyone who doesn't know you, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Well, thank you for having me, Emma. Absolute pleasure. I apologise. It looks like I'm in a fish tank. We seem to be very slightly overexposed on the blue on these settings, but it's cool. We'll deal with it. So, very briefly, my name's Rob. So, hello. I have been investing in property for about 15 years now. Previously, I was a pilot in the RAF and transitioned from that into property, and have been growing a portfolio, kind of building it up for the last 15 years or so.
Amazing, amazing. So the reason I wanted Rob to come on here today is that he talks about what he calls his property unicorn strategy. So I've got his book here. It's really fantastic. And I've also done one of his courses. And we all hear about all the different strategies, and all of them, according to everyone, is a unicorn strategy. But I really think that Rob has nailed this one. It's very accessible for what I would call people who, aren't necessarily huge developers. It's a really accessible strategy. And what's great about it is I'm not going to say hands-free because that's not true, but it's basically less hands-on, and you get a really great monthly recurring income on his kind of strategy. So I thought absolutely. So I've got some mentees as well. So I've said to them, look, you've got to jump on because these are the sort of things that you guys need to be doing. So hopefully they'll have lots of questions coming in. So that's really for me. Rob has this strategy basically around mixed use property. So I really wanted to get him on, find out a little bit of his story, how he managed to get there, and then chat on that. So let's jump in. So Rob, I'm very excited that I've got a real live maverick on
Say unicorn.
me. I feel like, in fact, I nearly watched it last night. So so that's great. Top Gun, here we go. Tell us a bit about your flying background, and also I know it's really nice, isn't it? But when I think of my past, the kind of roles that I did, how I've managed to kind of implement some of those learnings into your sort of property. How has it kind of affected you? Because there's not going to be many of us who are, have been pilots like you.
Yeah, really good question, Emma. So in a nutshell, I joined the Air Force in 2001. So a long time ago now, just before we went into Afghanistan, and was very lucky to have a career flying fast jets. So I was a Tornado F3 pilot, which is air defense, did a lot of flying around the world, a lot of time in the Falkland Islands. And then I went back into the training system as a Hawk tactics instructor, if you like. Where I was basically teaching students to operate the airplane as a weapons platform, and did that for a few years before going to South Africa on exchange tour in 2010, which kind of was not the right move for me, it turned out. This was a case of going somewhere with grand expectations, it not turning out as I wanted it to turn out, and then realizing that the world doesn't have your back, right? No, when you're in a job, nobody's really looking after you that well. I'm not going to go into the details, but I decided to leave the Air Force at that point. So I came out in 2011. Now, when I transitioned into civilian life, I didn't have any intention or aspiration of getting into property. I was actually looking for a job in the airlines. 2010, 2011, bottom of the last recession, nobody was recruiting. So it was not a great time to be looking for jobs in civilian world. So I just started with some of the savings I had buying little small buy-to-let properties. Your standard up in the north, 30, 35,000 pound purchases, do a bit of some renovation refurb on it, get it refinanced, stick a tenant in. And that was kind of the start of the journey, and worked out before I did any sort of education and thing like that. This sort of BRR, which people call it now, is it BRRR, however many R's you want to put on the end of it, depending who you are, kind of fell into that by accident, because we were, sort of about 45,000 in after the refurb, and they were getting revalued at 65,000, pulling most of the money out. I was like, well, okay, that's pretty cool. Stick a tenant in. It was easier back then. And just started doing those, getting a sort of conveyor belt of those. Now, you said, or you asked, what did you take from the military in terms of skill set? Well, in terms of hard skill set, absolutely nothing. There was very little in terms of, flying an aeroplane that was directly transferable to property. But what was directly transferable was the mindset. So that sort of high performance mindset, and also in the military, it's very much a lifestyle. It's a culture rather than just a 9-to-5 job. And I feel that sort of was gave me a lot of acceleration in my property world, because I just kind of approached it in the same way, in that sort of, it's your life, it's now what you're doing, it's not a job. And so, put those high performance techniques to work in property. Don't get me wrong, there's also a lot of bad things that being in the military gave me. Inability to manage team very well was one of them. Being a little bit finicky and high performance driven, and suddenly working out that when you're out of the military, not everybody in the real world does what they say they're going to do all the time. So that was an adjustment. But yeah, that was the start of the journey, and just carried on building it from there.
Amazing. Yeah, I really love that. And just guys, just so that we know where you're all tuning in from, if you could pop in the chat whereabouts in the country you are, because I'm literally down south and Rob's a bit sort of further and across. So it's always good so we can sort of tailor that as well.
I'm actually down south as well at the moment. So I live in Winchester, but I invest in Chester.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think that kind of mindset, high performance. But what I really loved that you said was talking about a lifestyle and a culture. I was literally talking about somebody who's completely non-property, deals with startup companies, bit of a high flyer, but not really into property. And I was kind of explaining that we are kind of in a little world, aren't we? So look, we've got Kent, we've got Isle of Sheppey, so lots of Kents at the moment. That's all near me. Is that you don't know, we sort of live in this kind of bubble in property. It's a place where you can talk about mindset, can't you? Because generally in a normal world, it's kind of a bit poo-pooed. If you start jumping around like, some of the big boys, they'll be like, oh, this is terribly American, especially in the UK. And then equally, there's so many bits in property. There's so many different types of property. There's so many different types of strategy. There's so many acronyms. There's so many 3-letter words, all of these things that actually it is a little culture, and it is a kind of a lifestyle of its own. And actually to come into that is very different. And then when you're explaining what you do to others, it can actually be really confusing. Like I've got friends that say, I just don't know what you do, Emma.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, okay, you've got a bit of property there, but you seem to do a few other bits and pieces, and then you talk about investors and all of this, and so it can be really kind of confusing. So I absolutely love that kind of analogy that the army is this kind of closed group. You all kind of understand each other, don't you?
Absolutely. It's got its own language. It's got when you stick a bunch of pilots together, they speak pilot language. And everybody else gets really bored and repelled from a group of pilots sitting with each other, because they're the most boring group of people that you could meet in the world. Not that property people are boring, by the way, but it's the same, right? You put a group of property people together, they're going to talk about property stuff and understand, and that's going to be a different language to everybody else. So it is very much a culture. It is a community. And I think that's really important, that people find their community when they're in property, because doing it by yourself can be a tough process, I think. So that having that support network around you is quite important.
Absolutely. So let's move on. So you said you started getting into your, BRRR, or however many R's it is, buy, refurbish, refinance. And, you definitely talked about these kind of away from you, further away. I mean, how do you feel like that now? Is that something, obviously you're still away from Winchester? Are you a fan of that?
No. So at the time I was living in Chester. I only moved down to Winchester a couple of years ago. So I spent pretty much most of the 2010 to 22 building my businesses and portfolios up in the northwest. So I was in it every day, right? And at the start I was in there doing the DIY, trying to work out how to do like push fit plumbing and all of that sort of stuff. And it was a rapid learning curve. And generally what I would do is try my hand at stuff work out it was rubbish, and then have to bring in a professional to come and redo it anyway, which is probably a standard process that a lot of people go. But that was kind of, again, the first experience of actually building out your team and understanding how to do things in a more leveraged basis, rather than being in the weeds of doing everything yourself all of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So just talk us a little bit more. So obviously you came out the army, you started doing these kind of up north, cheaper, buy, refurbish, refinance, trying to sort of pull as much of your money out. How did you then kind of move through coming to this situation where you're now looking at these kind of, as you call them, unicorn deals, which have that kind of more, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that more kind of mixed use, very much more kind of FRI, hands-off scenario. But what I love about what you talk about is you talk about doing, you know, one deal a year or two deals a year, and that adding on, you know, $3,000 to your turnover, to your income. So obviously that's, you know, going to be hugely appealing. So yeah, so how did you move through going from your BRRs to start with?
So the natural progression was, after single lets, I started and fell accidentally actually into HMOs. So my first HMO was an accident, but worked really nicely. So then started doing HMOs. At the time, I was also sourcing HMOs for a lot of military guys. I actually had some money in the bank, sourcing, project managing, and then managing. I set up an HMO letting agency, and everything just carried on growing. So I kept accumulating, then started doing sort of small blocks of flats. It sounds quite grand, but you know, nothing major, into commercial conversions. Then started, you know, picking up a few sort of mixed use buildings, and ended up in 2018 starting sort of first new build development. So really just progressing through those strategies. The honest answer to the question is, I got to a point before I started the first new build where my portfolio was probably too big, actually, and I had about sort of 90 tenants of my own in my own units that I owned, and that sounds great. I think everybody's got the expectation of just continue growing, continue building, right? Bigger is better. But the reality is, bigger means more moving parts, more complexity, right, and more issues that it throws up on a day-to-day basis. So it was becoming quite a big management burden. I had my own management agency. Then I went through I'd guess I call it like the pivot point, an 18-month period from the end of 2018, where firstly my mother unexpectedly passed away. And she was running the letting agency for me because I'd sort of very, very cleverly leveraged and delegated that to her to run, and the team within the letting agency. And then I went through a separation, and then COVID hit all within 18 months. When COVID hit, my main contractor went bust, and it left us with a site that was unfinished and a lot of development finance burning a lot of interest through lockdown. So it was a challenging 18 months, and I took some time off in those lockdowns, looked at everything that was going on, and went through the sort of 80-20 process. We talked about it at the event that we met, didn't we? The Pareto principle, which is 20% or 80% of your income, 80% of your profits is going to come from 20% of whatever, your properties, your product. You know, 80% of your issues is going to come from 20% of your tenants. And when I reviewed it, that was really very much what I saw. And that 80-20, when I analyzed the mixed use buildings, I had a couple in my portfolio at that point, were the ones that were pretty much propping up the portfolio and giving the majority of the income and the least of the hassles. So after COVID, I set about restructuring everything, getting rid of, you know, a lot of my sort of older stock, more challenging stock, shrinking down the portfolio, and then focusing on buying, as you said, one unicorn deal a year. And that is now effectively my target. It's just one a year, but they're, you know, larger, which create a significant amount of monthly income in a hands-free manner, which, as you say, again, is generally doing FRI leases, so fully repairing and insuring leases on those units.
Amazing, amazing. And then I really wanted to ask a question out of that, because your path was, you know, potentially the path that, as you said, a lot of people imagine. I'm going to start off with, you know, a few buy-to-lets, and then I'm going to move on to HMOs, and then I'm going to blocks of flats, and then I'm doing commercial conversions, and now I've got a letting agent and all this, that, and the other. Is that, looking back on your life, I mean, obviously you've changed it now, but now when because you do mentoring as well, is that kind of what you advise, or do you kind of advice? I mean, we all know that everyone has this kind of shiny penny syndrome. There are so many opportunities in property. They all seem very easy, but they're all equally as challenging. They have their challenges to achieve it. But do you think people should kind of be sticking to one thing? Do you think it's, you know, personality driven? Where do you come from with this kind of strategy and how people should move forward with their property journey?
I think ultimately at the end of the day, you need to do what works for you. But I've always said that the secret to success is not about the strategy you do, right? It's not about you. It's about your ability to focus, stay consistent, and have discipline. That's it, right? So focus. I'm sure everybody has heard the acronym for it: follow one course until successful. So if we focus on one thing, build a portfolio or a strategy or whatever it is, it doesn't mean we can't then systemize it, delegate it away, and do something else. But what a lot of people do, exactly as you said, is shiny penny syndrome. And I think that's something that the industry is somewhat responsible for. When I say industry, I mean personal development, wealth creation, property training industry. It's great, fantastic, but very often doesn't serve people because they get distracted very easily. And you know yourself, you will go on YouTube or Facebook and you'll see a video here about something, then another video here, and you go, that looks awesome, this looks awesome, I can make money here, I can make money there. And it kind of overwhelms, or you do loads of things and you do them well. Then you've built something that's really difficult to manage. Okay, so benefit of hindsight and doing it for 10 years is a wonderful thing to have. And I think what a lot of people do with experience is they build up these sort of unmanageable machines, these beasts, if you like, which then become quite difficult to manage. Go, there's a better way. Let's actually restructure this now to make my life easier because there's too many moving parts. And I like to think that's, you know, why I work with all my clients is so I can sort of impart that experience and try and keep people on track, away from the shiny pennies, going down the train tracks to do something that works for them, but in a disciplined and consistent way that's building something that is manageable.
Yeah, I love that. I always say you need to be consistently persistent and persistently consistent. Kind of, it's that cyclical process, isn't it? Yeah, if anyone has had shiny penny syndrome, do drop a 1 in the chat box, because certainly I know when I started, there was just so many different things, and I like to get back. So it's really similar to you, is getting back to that foundation. What is it that really kind of suits us, we can stick to, and really keep going. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so let's kind of move on to, you know, you've got through, you had this kind of huge basically beast, I suppose, and you suddenly realize that it kind of almost, I could see like a light bulb shining and turning on in your head, saying, what am I doing all this work for? When actually, if I just concentrated on this side of things, this kind of moves forward. So yeah, so how did that kind of come about, where you really started to see this strategy clearly?
So yeah, it was definitely through that COVID lockdown. You know, that was very much a period of reflection and change and planning. And it was interesting actually, because the real crunch point was when we were on this new build development and the main contract went bust. That was quite a traumatic period to go through, especially because then all the subbies were coming and knocking on my door going, where's our money? It's like, well, paid the contractor, they've not paid you, and they've gone bust. So it was quite a difficult thing to navigate. But within that period, it was obviously challenging for a lot of other people as well in many ways. And we found kind of, not my first unicorn deal, but my first, after I kind of termed the unicorn phrase, the next one, which we found as a direct to vendor property through that first lockdown. And it was a guest house in Chester, which was a large guest house, 14 ensuite rooms, 2-bed flat. Which there was a very obvious need for. The vendor wanted to dispose of it. They had a high motivation. They wanted to retire. Owning a guest house in the middle of a COVID lockdown was not a perfect thing for them to be doing. And so we managed to negotiate a deal that had multiple elements to it, including leveraging off other parts of the portfolio and some deferment elements. And, you know, bought this big unicorn in the middle of Chester, which has proven extremely sort of lucrative since then. And that was like, right, one of these a year for the next 10 years, all I need, nothing more. And it's way less work because, you know, as you said, the industry kind of goes, play the numbers, get out there, view 100 properties a month, offer on all of them 20% or 25% below market value, you know, the standard sort of stuff, which is miserable in itself. And I much prefer going find one property that is the right property with the right set of circumstances, view it once, offer on it once, get one deal, that's it. And so generally I'll only see 5 to 10 properties a year now, and we're buying one to two properties a year in our portfolio.
I love that. You are such a man after my own heart. Mine comes from a position of being very busy, a mum, you know, multiple kind of people relying on me, lots of things going on. And I just don't have time for that. Spending hours going out, buying donuts, sitting and having a coffee with the agent. I mean, that's all very nice, but I don't even have that time with my family or my friends. So I hardly want to do that with an estate agent. So I'm exactly the same. I know that if I'm going to view a property, unless something looks very different to what I imagine, I'm going to be making an offer on it. Yeah. I just, you know, I know all of those parameters. So yeah, absolutely. But I thought we'd just jump in. So Temi's asked a really fantastic question. And I think this basically, this interview should answer that. But she said, what's the next natural step after building a portfolio of buy-to-lets?
Great question. And I hate to say this, but Temi, it depends. So number one, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, what your aims are. And I'd say it also depends on the mechanics or the metrics in that existing portfolio. So the way that I look at portfolios, when I started in property, I was all about buy, right? I just want to keep buying. That's going to be my pension pot. I'm going to keep accumulating until the day I shuffle off this, you know, this mortal coil, and then the kids will get it all. I've changed that mentality quite a lot, I'd say, since COVID. And that is a portfolio, I think, should be a fluid entity. And every year what I do is I do sort of strategic sort of review of the portfolio. Look at what equity do I have in different properties, what returns on a property by property basis. And what I'll generally do is go, what is the return on equity in that property? How's it performing? So when I'm buying property, I look at what's return on capital employed. That's like the initial metric I use to assess a deal. But after you've owned it for years, right, you could have a load of capital growth. The metrics will be very different. So, you know, if you've got, let's just be ridiculous. Let's say you've got a couple of £100,000 worth of equity in a property and it's giving you £2,000 a year post-tax income, right? We could do way more with that. So actually there needs to be that constant cycle of portfolio optimization, release equity to be roll into new deals. And that should be quite a fluid process. So that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing is holding a portfolio should be there for cash flow. So there should be a point where it's giving you the life that you want to lead, right? When you get to that point, you then have the flexibility to do whatever you want to do. Fantastic place to be. So metric one is always security. We want a portfolio to pay for our lives, just like the basics, pay for our rent, mortgage, bills. Metric two is, can we actually now lead a life, which is freedom, right? So when we have that, we can then start doing whatever we want. We could, you know, try development, larger things. So I run mine like a sort of a risk pyramid, if you like. And at the bottom, my portfolio is built on, I'd say, really boring blocks of flats or mixed-use buildings with leases on. So, you know, set them up, FRI leases, 10 years, set and forget, don't go into the place for 10 years. That's the base. Above that, I've got some high cash flow stuff. So I still do have some single lets, which I'm naturally sort of selling on a annual basis. I've got some HMOs in there still, which is, you know, sort of high, slightly cash flowing. And then as we go up, I go into my short-term let side of my portfolio, which is more work, more effort, but a lot more cash flow. But I don't want to be completely exposed to that, right? That side of the market. I know that if that all goes missing, right, everything is supported by the bottom part of the portfolio. So it's important to understand what you're trying to achieve and why. And a lot of people go, wait a minute, you talked about focus. You've got sort of, you know, leases, you've got buy-to-lets, you've got HMOs, you've got short-term accommodation. I get that, but it's all the same property type. So in terms of focus, when I'm out there sourcing, negotiating, developing my relationships with the commercial agents, buying, it's one specific property type. And then I decide what I'm going to do with that property type, depending on the sort of dynamics of the area, the demand in the area, all that sort of stuff. Okay. So you're just looking for one thing, buying one sort of thing. And then, you know, if I'm totally honest, leases are easy, park those, short-term accommodation, you know, have a management function in place so you can focus on the day-to-day.
Amazing. Well, I hope, Temi, that answered that question for you. Really, really great answer. So, and just to clarify, guys, if you're, because most of us talk about ROI, return on investment, and Rob mentioned ROCE, so return on capital employed. So that basically means the money left in. So, you know, if you were to just go ahead and buy a property with a deposit, 25%, that's your capital left in. But if you do these creative methods that we've spoken about, you might buy something, add some value, refinance and pull most of your money out. But let's say you've left 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds in there. What are you getting on return of that? So I love that as well. It's so important, isn't it, to look at the equity involved. And that's where we talk about, if you've got you know, if you've done it the traditional way, you've saved up money, you've bought a property, perhaps you've got your own property that you've been paying down, you've got this whacking great load of equity, and it's just sat there doing nothing. And I'm always like, people say to me, oh, I've got no money, I got nothing, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, but you've got 450 grand's worth of equity in your property. What are you talking about? You've got loads. And that is, to me, it's coined, isn't it, as lazy money.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So many people have got that. And I think that is just, you know, really, really key.
And it depends. I mean, you know, it depends what you're trying to achieve, which is what I said depends on your own goals and other things that are going on. And there's no one size fits all for all of this. And it also depends on your own risk tolerance and risk structure. And what you'll generally find is as you get more equity, more wealth, right, you're quite happy to de-risk and have lower returns. So I'd always say when you're starting off, you're probably going to be looking for higher returning style properties, probably more work, less of them out there. You're gonna have to put more of your sweat equity in to, you know, add that value, turn it around to get that higher ROCE. If you got 10 million worth of equity, you only need 5% return on that, right? And you're getting, what's that, half of, you know, 500,000 a year in terms of income from a 10 million portfolio at 5% return. So depending on your circumstances, it's going to depend on your risk level and therefore what returns you're looking for.
And I think one of the things that really made me laugh, and I think when you come into this kind of industry, you know, property, you know, stocks and shares, there's this certain kind of sexiness around it, isn't there? And that you've got to get bigger. And now, you know, this is my site, you know, I'm building 10 houses on here. But actually, you get so many people that have perhaps gone through your journey and inherently they now just want boring.
Yeah.
You know, you want to get to the stage, and especially as you get older, you know, you want to be spending, I'm sorry, we've got dogs going mad. I hope you can't hear too much. You want to be spending time, you know, doing all the stuff that you want.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll take over while you deal with the barking dogs. Yeah, look, I will never forget. I had a mentor once about sort of 8 years ago who actually was a sort of M&A, mergers and acquisitions entrepreneur. So very, very wealthy, multi-millionaire, doing, you know, 7-figure transactions with businesses. And I remember talking to him about property. It's like, look, do you do property development or investment? He's like, why would I do that? That involves work. It's like, all I do is take my money and stick it into wealth banking. And he said anything over 8% return, he doesn't touch because it's too risky for him. And it involves actually making decisions. So he just gives it to a wealth manager, target 5 to 8% return through a wealth manager. But when you've got, you know, 50 million, you're struggling to spend that, you know, just the interest or the returns at that sort of level on that amount of equity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of talk into, you know, how to get to this boring scenario where you can go and get your kicks from doing all the fun things, like maybe flying a plane or jumping out of a plane or whatever it is, or, you know, spending more time on holiday. In fact, I was talking to, another lady, and she's taking her kids out of school and going to an English speaking school in Africa for 3 months. You know, these kind of things are really incredible. And certainly, you know, these are sort of things I'm talking about. So you have talked about looking at 5 to 10 properties per year. So this is a real change. A lot of the kind of, you know, property gurus and training companies, they're telling you to probably visit that many a week and, you know, an offer on all of them, as you say, offer, you know, maybe 25% below market value. So how is it that you get to this stage where you've managed to formulate it down into being so specific? Can you give, I mean, obviously that's like a long way, but can you give some kind of idea of what you're getting to be able to view so few?
For sure. I think to clarify, everything always sounds easy when you talk about it, right? And you know, there's always selling the dream and all of that sort of stuff. You're not just going to get to that stage on day one, right? You're gonna have to do some groundwork to get there. You're gonna have to understand your area, understand the, you know, the stock dynamics and the property dynamics in your area, understand exactly what strategy you're looking at. You still got to build relationships. Like I have you know, a few very high value relationships with commercial agents who are generally independent surveyors who get access to a lot of this sort of stock. And then it's understanding how to structure and break down and appraise these sort of deals. Okay, they are quite different to your standard buy-to-let, even your sort of, you know, standard HMO type property. So we're not necessarily looking at things on a bricks and mortar basis, you know, a comparable basis. A lot of the stuff that I do in my portfolio and teach my clients is how to manipulate the commercial valuation methodology in order to add value very quickly without doing any, I call it any of the building stuff, right? So any construction. Construction to me is hard work, it's expensive, there's loads of moving parts. And show me somebody, no offense to builders, who have had a seamless start to finish journey in construction. It just doesn't happen. And the reason for that is property is a fluid industry, right? Things are changing all the time. You have a property, you don't know exactly what you're getting. You're dealing with labor forces which are volatile. So it never happens as you want it to happen, and it always ends up taking more time and costing more money. And that is opportunity cost. So when people talk about the figures of their deals, very often they're not talking about the opportunity cost. They're like, here's my deal, but they haven't mentioned that it's taken them 18 months and cost another 50 grand than they're expecting, and so much, you know, in interest and all of that sort of stuff. That all needs to be included in your deal appraisal. So we very much try and add value through non-traditional, non-construction methods. And that's a process. That's a process to understand how to appraise it. Everything is a system. Everything can be learned. You know, when you have a paint by number system, anybody can do it. You just got to learn how to do the process. Because I've been doing it for a long time, I've got the ability to look at a property, you know, whether it's on or off market, understand how to unlock the value add. You know, what can we do non-traditionally to add the value, and therefore what do we want to buy it for? And because we're looking at things in a different light to other people, this is an interesting concept, and I think a few people struggle to get the head around it. As you say, look, the training industry says below market value, below market value, below market value. Therefore, you look at the price, and with bricks and mortar, below market value is quite a crude thing. There's only one way you can do it. You buy it more cheaply than it's worth bricks and mortar, right? And you try and add value and get a margin with that. When you're looking at commercial, and when I say commercial, a commercial valuation, we can buy something even sometimes above bricks and mortar value, but still add value in other ways that creates that margin to then be able to refinance the funds out. So if you have the ability to do that, and if you're metricing a sort of return on capital employed rather than just a BMV metric to buy something, it opens a whole load of other routes we can go down, which are really cool, really interesting, and actually go in and give good, you know, very solid offers to sellers who are generally more sophisticated because they're, you know, what they're selling is a bit more sophisticated, and with elements of creativity, deferment, and, you know, sort of negotiate these deals quite quickly, trumping a lot of the competition, if I'm totally honest with you. And so yeah, that's kind of how we do things. So we just have to learn that system.
Yeah, I love that. And I think these different strategies, when you talk about, especially around this kind of like below market value. So, you know, I really love purchase lease options, and I know you've spoken about those as well. But the funny thing I find when people ask you about that, they say, oh, you know, I want to do an option agreement on this particular property. They want 500,000. I'm thinking I'm going to offer them 400,000. I'm thinking, what? So you want to offer them less than they currently want, even though you think the value of it is only 400,000. I understand that, but then you want to pay them in the future. My view is with those kind of things is basically you've got to offer them what they want.
Yeah, correct.
With then creating, as you've mentioned, these kind of different sort of perhaps non-traditional methods of purchase, which then makes it more attractive in the long run. But it is, yeah, I absolutely love the way you talk, you know, you sort of talk about that, because people get so stuck on this price. So when I think of my own purchase lease option, probably at the time, the price that we agreed, you could have said it was, you know, maybe a bit inflated, but it didn't really matter, because what we were then doing with that property was adding value. We did do a bit of, you know, obviously change around. We changed a school into 16 studio apartments. But equally, the value of it now is, it's blown out of the water compared to what it was before. So it didn't really matter at that moment what it was, but we had to give the vendor what he wanted. He needed to have a great deal. He needed to feel like it was of benefit to him. And I have to say, when you work in that way, he absolutely loves it. I mean, he doesn't come around very often, but when he does come around, he's like, oh, I love it. He feels, he lived in this he was part of this property for like 25 years, and he's so thrilled that we've continued the building, because people get emotionally involved with buildings. Us as property investors should not really, but people do get involved. And when they see that you're doing such a great job, then they're going to tell their friends and all of those things. And, you can grow from that when you spoke about those relationships.
Yeah, it's the classic with creative. It's your price, my terms, or my price, your terms. It's not my terms, my price. That's probably not going to go down very well.
Yeah, exactly. So going back, so you spoke about the area, the stock, the strategy, the relationship, how to sort of structure your deals. So when it comes down to we just pick those apart a little bit. Area. So I'm always a huge fan, even though I live down south, of investing locally. Now everyone will say, oh well, it's so expensive, but one, there are deals. There definitely are deals. I think in any town there's always a deal, because there's always people dying, getting divorced, all of those kind of things, or unable to sell. So that's how we were able to do our option agreement. How do you feel? Because obviously there is this kind of north-south divide. Where are you at in the area type thing?
So my preference is always, when I start working with the client, we focus on, the first thing we do is like, what's the area? What's the strategy? And I would say we want to pick a strategy that you're engaged with. That's the main thing, that you're resourced for and you're engaged with. There's no point doing serviced accommodation if you hate the thought of having short-term tenants or managing short-term tenants, right? It's like, don't force yourself into something because you've been on a training course to learn how to do SA or HMOs. I've seen that happen a lot, and it's miserable, right? People are like, no, you've got to be engaged with it as part of the process, part of your vision. So I would say pick with something you're engaged and want to do. And ideally, you want to try and do it in your local area, wherever that may be. So that is the ideal. Now, I do understand that some strategies will not work in a local area. Depends where you live. I also agree with you that the narrative of you have to go up north to invest is absolute rubbish, right? It's just wrong. So if you want to get cheap properties, yes, they are up north. If you're investing for the ROCE that we talked about earlier, that return on capital employed, we can get ROCEs anywhere. We just have to be able to add the value. So if we buy something for $1 million, but we can add the value by 400,000 and recycle capital out, right? As long as the income is big enough after higher debt costs these days, we're still going to get a great ROCE. So you're absolutely right. Deals are everywhere. And by the way, there's some fantastic yielding areas in the south coast, Portsmouth, Southampton, those sort of areas. You've still got very, very good gross yields in those areas. So yeah, you 100% do not have to go up north. That said, if you do want to invest remotely for a strategy that works for you, I've also got no issue with that, but don't scattergun, right? Pick one place that works, have a really tight radius around it, and you only go there. But you have to understand it's going to be more work for you because you're going to have to travel to get into the area. I always recommend that everybody gets involved themselves rather than just outsources the sourcing, all that sort of stuff. You need to understand the area, the dynamics, what you're buying. And you need to have a trusted team, management agents, builders, all of that sort of stuff. So I live in Winchester. All of my stuff is in Chester, 5 mile radius of Chester. I do go up once a fortnight because my kids are up there anyway. So I go and combine kid time and portfolio time when I'm up there. And it works absolutely brilliantly for me, right? I've got no issue doing that.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So yeah, anyone, let's hear your thoughts. Are you local in the chat or far, whether you like to or taxi? I always say to people, have you paid all this money to do a course to become a taxi driver? Because that's inherently what happens, isn't it? They spend hours and hours going up and back. And I believe the one thing for me about local is that you start to generate your own luck. And I don't agree with luck. But because you're on the ground, because you're there regularly, because you're picking up the kids, because you're, going to the gym, you naturally are able to network locally, build a real following, and it's you know what's happening in that environment as well. So yeah, definitely. So so you've spoken about a specific type of property. So yeah, can you sort of tell us a little bit more about what that looks for you when you're looking?
Yeah. So when we talk about unicorns, and just to clarify, my definition of a unicorn is you should be able to add at least £100,000 worth of value within 6 months, right? So 6 figures within 6 months is kind of my golden rule in terms of value add. And that means it takes out the planning system. So we're not looking for things with planning gain. PD, potentially. So some types of commercial conversion, depending on the type of property, but that's a bit more niche. It also has to create at least £3,000 a month worth of rent roll. Okay, so we're talking larger, higher density units, and we should be able to do it using creative strategies or other people's money and structure it in that way. So that's my definition of a unicorn. Now, within that, we've got various strategies that I teach. My favored, and I kind of always go like 80-20 with strategy. I want a primary and a secondary. My primary is called the urban goldmine. And that is mixed use buildings, generally some form of retail, commercial on the ground floor, and uppers that have already, this is important, already been converted into some form of residential, because that takes away all the uncertainty. I think that's an amazing sweet spot for the reason that residential investors don't like the commercial. They're scared horribly of commercial property. Commercial landlords don't like the residential because it's a nightmare for them. So there's a much smaller pool of people looking to buy this sort of property, right? And we can get some great deals and do some amazing things with it. So that's my primary strategy. And my secondary is the apart hotel. So that's generally buying old sort of B&Bs, guest houses, even commercial things, and turning them into that apart hotel. So high density, sort of high quality, boutique, bed city style, short-term let accommodation. But most of my attention is on the urban goldmine.
Amazing. So just to reiterate that, so that makes it very clear, this 100 grand, you've got to be able to add £100,000 worth of value in 6 months. So that's pretty huge. No planning, maybe PD, but basically no planning. And then you've got to net 3 grand rent a month.
That's my criteria. Yeah.
So interesting question. So Alan's just asked, can you give a price range that you might be looking at within that? I mean, obviously that's going to depend if you're up in Chester or down south. But is there generally what you're seeing in an area? Are you looking at similar prices for this kind of unicorn deal?
Yeah, totally area dependent, right? So it is going to depend on where you're investing. To give you an idea of the sort of things that we do, we're kind of in purchase 300 to 800,000 pound bracket are the sites that we're buying. We have one of my strategies called Sparkle, which is like a mini unicorn, which is generally a commercial, smaller commercial, like a restaurant, cafe, something like that, hairdresser on the ground floor, and one flat above. And there are certainly areas in the UK you could buy something like that for sub £100,000 still, and that's a great place to get started if you're happy to invest in those sort of areas. In fact, I'm looking at divesting a couple of mine that I bought 10, 12 years ago, which have gone up in value a lot. So again, we talk about the equity. There's a lot of equity sitting there. I want to put that to better use. So we're looking at.
Everyone's looking to buy something. Rob's got some for sale.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're going to be market value sales, so it will just be a return on investment for somebody who wants to park money rather than do the active strategies. But there's always that market out there buying it, isn't it? So it's not going to be sold at a discount. But yes, I always look at selling. We're looking at selling some of our bigger ones as well, actually. So we're in a process of selling a block of 13 and a block of 9 as well. Again, just because we've had them for a long time. Let's be honest, the last, whatever mainstream media says about, property prices coming down, all that sort of stuff, there's been a lot of equity growth over the last 4 years or so since COVID. So yeah, we've got quite a lot of equity in some of the properties.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been, you know, we could never have imagined, could we, at the beginning of COVID, to imagine that we would be the property prices would continue to sort of go up the way they did. So it's pretty amazing. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about your apart hotels. Having got an apart hotel myself, I know some of the major benefits, but equally, like all strategies, there are some downsides as well. So yeah, tell us a bit more about your apart hotel model.
But before I go there, can I just, Alan's put a question in there. He said 300 to 800 is scary. And then if it all goes wrong, life is over. So it's a really good question, Alan. And I want to give you my thought process. So when I'm appraising deals, everything is about risk mitigation. Okay. So for a start there, I always have to have at least 3 exits to that deal. So I'll have my plan A, my plan B will be, right, if I can't do this, what can I do? And my plan C will be, if I can't do anything, can I just flog it and still make my money back? And something that we need to understand with property is it's a secured asset, right? So it's not like we're sticking 300 to 800 grand in stocks and shares, which could go to zero overnight. There is an inherent value and always will be an inherent value in the property we're buying. Of course, people make losses in property. Generally, the losses that I have seen, sorry, my dog's going now. I don't know if you can hear it.
We'll ignore them.
Generally, people who lose money in property is because they've loaned money incorrectly without the right security in risky development deals where the developer doesn't know what they're doing and gets the figures wrong, which is precisely why I don't go down that route anymore. Go down the property unicorn strategy, which mitigates all of that risk. You're buying an inherently valuable asset already, which you know is going to be below where it's worth. So that's really important to mitigate. And when I work with my clients, we do weekly deal appraisal. And most of that deal appraisal that I do is going through that risk mitigation process. Making sure that everything is covered, no stone is left unturned, to make sure people don't lose money. And if you do it right, you should not be losing money in property. So there is that inherent value. So I don't know if that answers the question, hopefully gives some, so whether you're buying something for 100 or a million, it shouldn't matter. It's a secured asset, which you're going to have. If the security is done correctly, there should be very, very little chance of you losing money on something if you do it right.
Absolutely. And I think going back to sort of Alan's question, for me, it's all about getting the foundations right. It's all about ensuring that you're not just guessing. So the number of people, I know there's a chap local to me, our local commercial agent said, can you go and have a chat with him and help him out? He bought what I think will end up being a really good mixed use property if he does the right thing with him. But he hadn't even read and he bought it at auction and hadn't even read the auction pack, so that is, if it all goes wrong, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
But, I know Alan as well, he's going through the process of really understanding what he's doing. He's really putting the foundations in, understanding his area, understanding the strategy that he wants to do. So as you've said, you're then mitigating that. What we want to get to the stage is there are going to be things that go wrong, but we want to reduce them. We don't want them to be £1 million mistake. We want it to be a mistake where, perhaps, the tenant is slightly less of a good yield. So it's not really, we're talking about, you could have maybe made a bit more, but you're still got a great cash flow. So let's say you're earning 2,800 instead of £3,000 a month. Well, that's no great terror, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
So so I think it's sort of getting those things. So yeah, Alan said makes sense.
Perfect.
So going back to the apart hotels. Tell me a bit about, how you got into it. Does it work for you? For me, I love it. But obviously, where I see the downfall with that is just the refinancing. It can take 2 to 3 years. So it is definitely that kind of longer model.
Correct. Yes, totally agree. And I think this is a common misconception in the industry. And finance is always one of those hot topics, right? Because it's so easy for a property training company to say, go and turn something into an HMO or an apart hotel, get a commercial valuation, pull all your money out, right? And so people get half the picture. And I remember there was a massive phase of it sort of 10 years ago, 2014, 2015, when I was sort of, getting into training myself, where the word on the street was you just go and buy a 3-bed house with 2 reception rooms, stick beds and wardrobes in the 2 reception rooms. You've got a 5-bed HMO. Go and get a commercial mortgage on it and pull all your money out, right? Absolute rubbish. Just doesn't happen. I remember having a heated argument in a session with a mentee once for a big training company. It was like, no, I've been told that this is what you can do. I'm like, trust me, no bank is going to lend you commercial valuation on the income because you put beds in the living room and the dining room, right? You have to do material changes to that thing. So I feel there's some bad information out there. Service accommodation, if you're going to get it valued on the service accommodation income, as you said, you will need 2 to 3 years worth of signed off accounts, right? Filed with Companies House, that the bank can look, because effectively you're in business lending at that point. You're not in property lending. So I do a lot of stuff with Lloyds. What we do is when we buy it, they will value it based on the AST income, the assured short hold tenancy. They know they're perfectly happy for us to short-term let, but they're like, look, we value this as if we have to repossess. We're not going to be operating it as an apart hotel or a block of service accommodation units. We'll just be valuing it as if there are long-term tenants in there, and that's what we can sell it on for, right? So that's how they're going to be doing that risk mitigation. Then 2 to 3 years later, they'll pass you over to the business finance team, who will then look at giving you a commercial valuation based on the actual income. And again, this is really important, the actual net income, not the gross income on a service accommodation unit. Nobody's going to lend on gross because you've got probably 50% plus worth coming out of that. So you need to understand that as well. So that's the finance. And that does make it a little bit more tricky to structure if you are, if you're looking for quick recycling of cash, right? Or you're working with other people's funds, JV investors, and you're promising you're going to recycle the cash, you need to understand those considerations. The actual model itself, I love, right? So the service accommodation industry is going through, or it will go through over the next couple of years, I would say a lot of rationalization. There's obviously a lot of, there's consultations going on with both licensing and planning, changes. So what will happen, or can't guarantee it, but I saw all of this happen with the HMO market about 10 years ago, when you get the C4 planning use class come in, permitted development rights, then Article 4 comes in, licensing schemes. The same will happen with service accommodation. So I don't see that as a bad thing. If you're operating properly, you've got units that are designed to future spec, and would, you're happy you get sort of sui generis or whatever, planning they'll put in, you're golden. So everything that we do as a part hotel will go through planning, we'll get it stamped, and then it's done, right? We don't have to worry about planning changes. It'll get done to the correct building regs with, the correct fire systems. It's all done. So we're not scared of licensing. Yes, there's another cost you've got to get in. And I think all of that change in the industry, what it will naturally do is flush out a lot of the sort of maybe the more amateur operators, dare I say it, and I've got no issue with rent to rent. There's a lot of people who get into the rent to rent side of things, rent to SA. I suspect margins will be, compressed to quite a point. So a lot of those operators might struggle as well. So if you're doing it at the moment and going, Rob says it's not going to work anymore. It all depends on the figures. But I know a lot of people overpay for rent to rent deals. But when you are operating it as a business, and SA for me is a business, right? It is a trading business where you should have a brand. You should have a USP. You should position yourself in a certain place of the market. If you're doing all those things, it's a fantastic cash flowing and lucrative business model if you're doing it in the right way. So I absolutely love it.
I like it. Definitely. So your apart hotels, just to understand, are they C1, or do you have more of a sort of a sui generis kind of model?
Yeah, so at the moment in the blocks that we've got, they're actually pre-existing flats that we've then sort of operating that block as so I would say that's not an apart hotel per se. We've got a couple of units, 3 units at the moment. They're actually going through planning for this. It's actually a very good question, because there is no use class for the apart hotel. So my understanding is it probably should sit under sui generis, but whether it's C1 or not. So we've got a unit that we have that is actually C1 already, and we've got the plan. So we own it already. We actually operate it as a large HMO, but we are putting plan in for a 10-unit apart hotel. Even the architect's not quite sure. Do we keep it C1 or go for sui generis? And that's just going to be a consultation with the planners. I'd have thought, but we're kind of going down tangent here. But this has got loads of interesting intricacies in terms of things like capital allowance claims, all of that sort of stuff about what you can and can't claim for. Is it a hotel? Is it a sui generis? It's kind of an emerging class, isn't it, the apart hotel? So I think it's an exciting time to be part of it, because it's almost an industry that's been carved out at the moment in terms of planning, legislation, regulation, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think this, where they go with the serviced accommodation licensing and, potential planning rules, how they're going to get that out, I think that will really show how that route's going to go. And I think we can only guess at this stage.
Yeah,
So
correct.
yeah, completely. So another thing that you've spoken about is you've got into kind of looking at business buying. And inherently, I think it is really important, and you've raised it a number of times, that we are running a business. And it's something that I do talk to a lot of people. A lot of people just sort of think, oh, I'm just doing property on the side. But actually, it really is a business. And you rightly said, if you've got rent-to-rent service accommodation, that is purely a business. You don't own property, so it's not a property business. It's purely a business. But along the way, when you're sort of running this business, you then have talked about, you did some more understanding of actually business buying. And I've done that myself, so we'll have a chat afterwards who we went with. But you've then talked about how this has enabled you to structure deals in this more creative way, even more creative than we already are in the property world. So could you just tell us a little bit about how that has helped you actually understanding more about the business world and the business environment to be able to be more creative when purchasing these properties?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a unicorn property is effectively its own little micro business anyway. So the way it's valued, all of that sort of stuff is different to normal bricks and mortar. One of my favorite strategies is called balance sheet hacking as an acquisition tool to buy property. And this is where effectively, rather than buying the property, you're buying the business that the property sits under. Now, there are quite specific sets of criteria we look for. So you're generally looking for just a holding company. It's easier if they're unencumbered. If there's lots of properties in there, it makes it, probably different considerations. But there's quite a lot of limited companies out there that just own a single asset, a single property, very often unencumbered if it's been owned for 20, 30 years. And that gives us a great opportunity of buying the business, and we can structure it in a way where when we start manipulating the balance sheet and tax liabilities that sit on the balance sheet of the limited company, we can actually buy the company for way less than the property's worth within it, which is a really nice way of being able to recycle capital quickly. Because I'll give you an example. So when we bought...
Can I just say, before you give that example, I want to repeat that. So what Rob is saying here, that you buy a business you basically buy a limited company with a property inside it. So even if the property is worth £400,000, he might be buying the business for £300,000, even though there's a property inside it for £400,000. I wanted to just reiterate that in case nobody heard that, because this is so incredibly clever, but really important. So sorry, do give your...
absolutely spot on, and thanks for highlighting that. And those figures actually are really good figures to use. I was going to illustrate using exactly those figures actually. So 400 to 300. So
I have done your course, Rob, remember.
What's that, sorry?
I have done your course, Rob.
You have, that's it. So it makes it a great way of recycling capital. So example, let's use those figures. So one of my holding companies bought the business, shares in the business with the property inside it. And let's say the property is worth 400 and we bought it for 300. And the reason, if anybody's wondering, how do you do that? It's due to the balance sheet position of the business you're buying. And property businesses that own properties are going to have deferred provision for corporation tax based on the value increase of that business. I don't want to go into any more detail on this session than that, but just trust me that because of the tax liability of the business, we can effectively knock that off when we buy the business. So let's say you're buying a business for 300,000 and it's got an unencumbered property within it that's worth 400,000. So my limited company will, in cash, you could do this bridging other people's money. Difficult to do it with finance, right? You're going to need to use a bridge or other people's money or your own money if you have it. Buy the business. On the same day that you buy the business, you can then refinance the property that's within it. So let's say the property is worth 400. Let's just, for sake of argument, say you can get a 75% mortgage on it. So you're going to pull 300,000 out on the refinance, which goes into the bank account of the business you just bought. The business you just bought then lends that money back to your main company and replaces the money you just used to buy that business, right? So it's a really nice way of recycling capital very quickly. And then when you mix it with some other strategies, you can actually increase the value of the property within the business on day one as well. We use some strategies like lease re-engineering, yield compression. I know I'm just throwing these out there and not explaining them, but just for the purposes of this, just assume that we can do that with various mechanisms, which is a really nice way of recycling cash. Now that money is not coming from nowhere. We're not getting rid of that 100 grand, or we're not just making 100 grand on day one. The tax liability is still there. So if the company sold the business, if the company sold the property in the future, it's going to have to pay that. But if we don't sell the property, we're never going to have to pay it, right? You only crystallize that tax liability when you sell. So if it's for a long-term hold, you're not planning on selling it, it's just going to sit there on the balance sheet as a deferred tax liability, which never has to get paid.
So guys, I would suggest you go back. There's not many people that I suggest this. Re-listen to this and put it on 0.5 times. Because Robert just covered some incredibly complex things in there, but incredibly important. So again, this is where it comes back to, you don't know what you don't know. And I do feel in anything that one does, whether it's you need help with your mindset, whether it is you need help with your strategy, whether it's whatever it is, do get help, guys, because these are things that you could be missing. You know, they're on your fingertips. You've got this great deal, but you don't know what these opportunities are. So it's, you know, it really is very, very important to go out of your way to constantly be learning. I mean, I'm just a literal learning junkie. You know, I just love any kind of new thing. So immediately I met Rob, you know, I'm immediately onto his courses, you know, just hearing what other people do, whether they structure it. And it may be just one nugget that comes from that completely changes a deal that you're doing. So I think it's really key. So with that, nicely segues into, I know we really
done.
Yeah, is tell us a bit about, so obviously I've got your book. You kindly shared
it's not mirrored. Okay.
some other bits. So tell us, how can people come and find you? What's the best way? You know, what do you have on offer? Please plug as much as you want.
Okay, it'll be a very, very, very brief plug. Look, I'd say if you want to know more about property unicorns, the best place to start is that mirrored book called Property Unicorns. There is a link. I don't know, Emma, if you're able to post a link to it somewhere.
Yeah, we will do a link, definitely.
We'll post a link. It's free plus postage and packaging, so it's £4.97, I think, postage and packaging, which gets it through your letterbox. And then within the book, it's going to go through detail everything I've just spoken about, right? So it's going to talk about all the strategies, going to talk about all the value add mechanisms. There's a huge amount of value and content in there. And then if you want to find out more about my ecosystem, there will be ways that you can, you know, sort of reach out to me through resources within that book. So I'd say that's the first place to start.
Yeah, so already we're being asked for the link. So definitely you send that link to me, Rob, and we'll get it into this, and we'll also share it as well. I do usually do some follow-up stuff as well.
Can I share it on here at the moment? Is there?
Yeah, I mean, you can just chuck it into that, but because we're on multiple
okay.
sites,
We'll just post it under the thing, shall we?
Yeah, it might not, but it's worth popping it in if you've got it. And then
I put it into that private chat thing. Sorry, I've not used Restream before, so I'm just.
There's just like an R just beside where it's got R, and it just drops down. Just chuck it in there, and we'll see what it goes out to.
No, that's gone in private chat. That's it's all right. Don't worry about it. We'll put it in. I can't see where else to put it. It's fine.
Okay, so you might not. I've got this here. There you go. I've put that in. So
there you go. Got it.
So that's at least gone into a couple of them. There we go, Alan. So you should be able to see that as well. So brilliant. So Rob, I really, really appreciate you coming here. I do love talking to people that see the world perhaps a little differently to others. I suffer from that Malay as well. I seem to look at things very differently from others. But I think it's really key and really important. And you do hear, don't you, whatever the masses are doing, you do something different.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly the way you structure things, I absolutely love it. It needs a bit of learning. It needs a bit of sort of educating, but it's not out of reach of people who, you know, are not that experienced either. So it is just literally, you know, getting that support again. So I really appreciate your time. So if anyone hasn't done it, we're putting the link in. Go and buy Rob's book and follow him through. As I said, I've done one of his courses and I really enjoyed it. There were some really good nuggets in there. So wherever you are in your journey, it's worth a follow. So yeah, Rob, over to you for any kind of closing comments for anyone who is listening.
Look, closing comments. This is actually really simple. Simple is rarely easy, but I actually find doing this much more simple than a lot of other property models. And everything that this is designed for is to go 80-20. So it's designed to achieve more with less. And after doing this for 15 years, there's two ways of doing it. Number one is you can hustle and grind and go down that route, right? Which is what a lot of people seem to wear like a badge of honor. Or you can go down the simple route and build a ecosystem that's way more hands-off, not completely passive, just doesn't exist. There's going to be some stuff you've got to do, but way less work, way less risk, more actual net cash flow at the end of the day, right? With a smaller, more perfectly formed portfolio. And that to me is what property should all be about.
I love that. I'm writing that in. Achieve More with Less by Rob Stewart. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, guys. So please do, we're back again next Monday. I know Tuesday, we occasionally do a Tuesday session, but we're back on Monday and we're going to be talking all about tenants next week. So yeah, if you are into tenants, if you want them, and especially with the renters' rights that's coming up. So we've already had books ordered here, so that's great news. But yeah, we're going to be covering that off next week. So again, Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate that. And yeah, look forward to catching up very soon. Okay, guys.